Welcome to the Scott Townsend Show, brought to you by Dietzo Man Productions.
Hey, this is Scott Townsend. Thanks for watching and listening to the Scott Townsend Show. I have with me a great guest. Of course, any cast member of Disney is a great guest. It's Dan Cockerell. He has written a new book, How's the Culture in Your Kingdom? He's a former vice president with Disney's Magic Kingdom with 26 years of experience. Started out in the parking lot of, was it the Magic Kingdom?
Epcot.
Epcot, okay.
Yeah.
And then went over to Disneyland Paris, helped out over there. Was that opening it or?
I got there on January 1st, 1992. They hadn't even painted the parking lot yet. And, we opened April 12th of 92. So I was there about 3 months before the park opened.
Wow. And then he came back to the States where he worked at Epcot and Magic Kingdom and Disney. When I was there, it was Disney MGM Studios, but you were at the Disney Hollywood Studios?
Disney Hollywood Studios.
Yeah. And so now he's in the consulting business and he's written this new book. And so let's talk about it, Dan.
Well, I love to see that book with all those Post-its in there. That makes me feel good. That's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You should see all the handwriting in here. I've got all kinds of questions and yeah.
I'll tell you that the book was, people say, why did you do a book? And I think when you get in, what I've learned is when you get into run your own business, if you have the ability to write a book, told me, the word authority and author aren't go together, and that's not a coincidence. When you write a book, you become an authority on a subject. I didn't feel much more of an authority after I wrote the book, but somehow other people thought I was. So it was good. Plus, it makes you get your thoughts in order. That was one of the hardest things leaving after working at Disney for 26 years. Once I left, I had to sit down one night and say, okay, I know I made the right decision here, but what do I know? Like, what do I know that people are interested in knowing about? And,
right.
So I just kind of sat down one night, and that's how everything starts. You start jotting down notes, and I said, all right, well, let's see, I know how to communicate. Okay. What does that mean? Well, I know how to work on teams. Okay. What does that mean? I know how to collaborate. I know how to handle stress. And so I just went through this list of things and came up with this big list of all these things I knew how to do. And I sent it to a friend of mine who's a professor at Rollins College near me here. And Keenan looked at it and he sent it back the next day. And he said, Dan, I clearly see you have three themes here. You have leading self, leading team, and leading organization. And here's where they all fit. And it was amazing. I didn't see the puzzle, but he put it right together. And all of a sudden, the book was, the format of the book or the outline was at least done. And we actually went back and added a whole section on leading change because I think that was important to include. And so as I wrote the book, the editor reminded me, said, Dan, just to remind you, you are not the first person who's written a book on management and leadership. So it better be interesting. So I put a lot of stories in there.
That's good. Yeah, I like that.
I got about probably halfway through writing it, and I just got burnt out. I told my wife, I said, I can't do this. This is too hard. And so she picked up the baton, and she wrote about half of it. She talked to me. She was my ghostwriter. And she'd say, okay, you had a story about this. What's that? And I said, I can't remember. She said, Dan, you've been coming home for 26 years with 6 stories every night. Now you can't remember one story. I said, all right, well, let me just give me 24 hours. It'll come to mind. Right. And so it really was a team effort. And it's funny, our daughter read it and she said, I know exactly what parts you wrote and exactly what parts my mom wrote. So, but it's got my goal. The book was just laying out, I think, what I thought were important things to think about and do. And it's not just about running a business. It really was about how do you holistically become just a better person and not only do well, but enjoy the ride. I talk to so many people today that are just stressed out, and they, going to work every day is, really stressful. And for some people, staying home is stressful. Like a lot of people, work is a release for them. Mm-hmm. And I just believe if you can, it's really hard to be holistically successful if you're not happy in your personal life or not happy in your professional life. And when I say that, there's a gentleman who wrote a great book called The Millenial Whisperer. And he really got me hooked on this. He said, look, if 70% of your job you like, you have a great job. And if 30% of that is the stuff you hate doing, you still have a great job. And it's not all, people say, well, working at Disney must have been magical every day. I'm like, no, it wasn't. There's nights I got home, I'm like, honey, I need a beer. It was not magical today. So there's, there's things you don't like to do along the way, but hopefully I was able to capture some stories and then some real specific tactics. I'm big on, we can talk about philosophical things all day long. Leadership is about action. If you believe in something, the only way you can prove it is through behaviors. When people say, my family is the most important thing to me. It's like, all right, well, why don't you come home every once in a while and have dinner with them instead of being out and, working and things.
Prove it.
Or prove it. Or, my kids mean the world to me. Well, great. Why don't you read them bedtime stories when you get home? It's like, there's a gap. And I always call this factor the gap. It's what we want to be, the vision we have of ourselves, and what we actually do. And if we can hold ourselves accountable and just push towards that to get that gap as small as possible, I think that's when we really start to be genuine. And what that means also is you have to give up some things. Because I learned over my career at Disney that you can't do everything. And I think everyone thinks you're supposed to be able to do everything. And that's just not true. And I remember calling my dad when our son, he's just turned 25, but when he was first born, I called my dad. I said, man, things are not going well. He said, well, what's going on? So well, at work, I'm not connecting. I'm making bad decisions. And I was playing rugby at the time in France, so the club there. And I said, I missed a few practices and that they're getting on my back because we have this big tournament coming up. And then, then I said, and Valerie expects me to be around with our new baby all the time. Imagine that. So he's like, well, Dan, it sounds like maybe you got too much going on. And I said, yeah, maybe I do. So what do you think you should do? This is how he would coach me. He'd let me reach my own conclusion. I said, well, I could quit my job, leave my wife, or stop playing rugby. And all of a sudden it was a really easy decision.
Right.
And I left the team and everything got back in balance because I was just trying to do too much. So I think a lot of being happy in life is prioritizing and sacrificing. And there's a time and a place to do everything, and you can't do it all at the same time. And knowing what your priorities are very clearly. And I love that what you said, Scott, there, prove it, is that's where you really get the best benefit and the most success and fulfillment.
So let's jump into the book real quick here. At the very beginning, let's see what was at the leading self. Yeah. You talked about knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Why is that so important?
Yeah, it's funny. The editor, we had a long conversation about whether we should put that whole lead self at the end of the book, because he said, a lot of people aren't expecting to read that in a business book. And I said, it's key. If you don't take care of yourself and you're not operating at your best self, it's really hard to do anything else well. And that idea of strengths and weaknesses is important. I've studied for a long time self-awareness, and I've managed people who had high self-awareness, and they're really fun to manage and work with, because when you give them feedback, they actually listen to you and they make improvements because they're able to see and be critical on themselves. And I've worked with people who have very little self-awareness. And these are the people, when you coach them, they look at you like you're crazy. And after a while, you think you are crazy. You're like, no, I really don't think you have a good relationship with people. And they explain to you 5 reasons why they do. And then you're like, I don't know how to get through here. So that self-awareness is important. I think we're always taught to be, don't be vulnerable. Don't look like you ever made a mistake. And the interesting thing in leadership is, when you make a mistake, everyone knows and everyone sees it because it's out there. And so the best thing you can do is embrace it and do better next time around. And so what I learned at Disney along the way as I got bigger and bigger jobs was, I didn't have enough experience in all the areas I was leading. I was never an engineer, but now I'm in charge of these attractions and all this equipment. I had never been in finance. Industrial engineering, that's a huge department we use at Disney to really forecast how people are going to behave and how we need to think about distributing labor. So I had to start really knowing that, okay, I'm going to do what I do well. And that's being out and engaging people, talking with people, creating an emotional connection, making sure they felt like they knew why we were running this park and how big the responsibility was. And then I'm going to get the people with all these skill sets around me to do their jobs and contribute. And as a leader, it's hard. It's hard to recognize that you recognize you don't know everything and you don't try to know everything. And you start to lead, and what I call is facilitating a team. You don't do everything. You facilitate the solutions. And if you don't have the right experience or background, you find someone that does, who's going to come up with the answer for you. Because your job is not to come up with the answer. Your job is to find someone to come up with the answer and to lead along the way. And I think a lot of new leaders are always trying to prove themselves instead of building relationships with their people. And I always used to tell my managers, look, we know you can do this job. That's why we hired you. We know you can do it. You have nothing to prove to us. All we want to see you is make sure the people reporting to you are successful. That's what your job is now. And it's hard for people to make that leap from individual performance to team performance. And if you recognize what your strengths are, you can go use those every day. And if you know what your weaknesses are, you're not going to go out and try to use those every day. You're going to find people to help you fill in the gaps.
So we had a couple of weeks ago, I had a Myers-Briggs coach on the show, Jesse Anderson, and I'm a ENFP, and my strengths finder, it was like what was it? Ideation, input, connectedness, restorative, and strategy. And we were talking about just what you said. Once you know what you're good at and what you're not so good at, now you know what kind of people you need to surround yourself with that can fill in the gaps, where, kind of watch your back to have your six when you're coming up with making decisions and you're not quite sure what to do. So yeah. I find it really easy to be the dumbest guy in the room. And I tell everybody that, I'm the dumbest guy in the room here. So you guys help me here.
That's your strategic advantage.
It's great to be underestimated.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I'm an ENFP also. And most of my strength finders are around people, positivity, relator, arranger, developer. So when what I learned from that exercise was I need to be with people as much as possible. So I would look at my calendar every week and say, okay, I need to maximize the amount of time I'm interacting with people, whether that's one-on-one meetings, walking in the park, being with people, because that's where I get my energy. It's where I get my best ideas. I'm not very creative on my own, but when I'm with other people, I'm extremely creative because I really am able to, use their ideas and play into those kind of things.
Bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah. And that was important for me. And to your point, I needed very, strategic, structured thinkers around me because I would go on. For me, an idea was never done. Once we made a decision, I'd come back the next day and say, hey, what about this? And like, well, Dan, we already made that decision. I just learned to discipline myself because I always thought there was more to add to something. And there always is.
You're right.
You need some logical thinkers around you going, nope, we pencils down. We're done on this one. Next time we'll come back at it that way. So
reminds me of the marketing joke. How many marketers does it take to change a blue light bulb? And the answer is, does it have to be blue?
Yeah. There you go.
Marketers are always coming up with ideas, and do we have to do it this way? Let's think of another way,
Yeah.
You also talked about imperfection. You just said that a while ago. You said, and I want to know, what do you mean by embrace your imperfection? Because I've never heard anybody say that, although we all know it's impossible to reach perfection. So why should I embrace my imperfection? What does that, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I guess when I talk about that, it's a piece of humility and vulnerability and just being clear to people that, you know what, that's not my area of expertise, and I defer to you on that. And I'm okay with that. It's funny. One of my favorite things to do was I'd go with our executive chef at the Magic Kingdom, and we would do food tastings, right? Here's the new veal shank we're doing, or here's the new pasta, and we always got.
That'd be a tough day.
Yeah, because the executive chef knew. All right, you invite the vice president to the tastings, and you get some extra points. And I was very clear with the executive chef. I said, Chef, I really appreciate you inviting me to these. I love being at these. They're fun. I learn a lot, but I'm not going to have an opinion on the food. And even if I do, I'm not even going to share it with you because I'm not the food guy. I don't have a great sense of taste or smell anyway.
Right.
And at the end of the day, our guests better than I do from a food and beverage perspective. And you're not cooking for me. You're cooking for them. So I just want to hear how you look at the process so I can learn it, but don't learn to me for expertise. And it's funny because a lot of people just assume if someone asks you your point of view, you should offer it. You should always offer it. And often I would if I had a point of view, but sometimes I just say, look, I'm not going to make up something just so it looks like I have a point of view here. You know what our guests like, and go there and keep inviting me to the tastings, because it was good. There's some good stuff. It's funny. I spent a lot of my time, I would spend, I would be with my general manager of entertainment, and we would watch a show. And in the show, I'd say, man, that was a great show. What did you see? And of course, he's like, well, I saw about 10 things that we need to improve upon. I'm like, wow, tell me what they are. And she'd say, well, the choreography, that they weren't hitting their marks right at the right time. And a couple of the costumes weren't quite there, and the music was a little off. And they would have this level of detail as experts, as professionals, that I wouldn't be able to see. So it's not that I was afraid of not giving an opinion. I was just, like I said, I was in a learning mode. And there's a point where you get in an organization where most of the time you're focusing on the how. How are we getting better? How do we make that better? How do we make that faster? And that's a lot of operations. But what I learned at Disney was, once I got to a vice president role, my job wasn't really how anymore. It was what. Because we can work on lots of stuff that has no value. And if I allow that to happen, I'm not doing my job. So my team's job was to figure out how to do it the best way. And my job was to come up with the agenda of what we should be focusing on. Because you can focus on things that has very little value. I remember being in a conversation, once again, coming back to food and beverage. Someone had mentioned that wouldn't it be great if we had gourmet quality food in our fast food restaurants? That's how we're going to differentiate ourselves. Disney wants to be different everywhere. And we worked on it for about a month and had meetings and talked about it. And one of the research people caught wind who were working on it, and she came to me and she said, can I come to your meeting next week and present some research? And I said, yeah, just give me a heads up. What's the research going to tell us? And she said, and I had a great relationship with her. She said, the research is going to tell you that you should stop working on this. So I was like, I'm listening. She came
right.
Next week, and she said, look, this is really cool. You guys are working on this, but the guests, basically the importance of fast food at Walt Disney World falls 28th on their list of the most important things that they need for their overall vacation. So if you make that fast food score 100%, the overall experience isn't even going to go up by 1%, because it's not weighted heavily enough. If you want to be spending your time in the right place, go make sure people get to do more attractions, and make sure your cast members are really friendly and making personal contact with the guests. The food and beverage project, even if you get it all right, everyone's going to say, good job, so what? And why do we spend all that time and resources? So even I got caught up sometimes in these pet projects where I needed someone to come out and be very candid and not be afraid to tell me, hey, Dan, you're working on the wrong stuff. And that's important. And I think that also applies to our personal lives. As your priorities, are you taking care of yourself? Are you doing the things that are important to you that are actually creating value? Or are you, like I said, sometimes I go on YouTube and 2 hours later, I'm like, well, I'm never getting that time back again. Slip. So spending the time in the right place is probably one of the most important things you can do at work and personally, I think.
You talked about, speaking of personal and professional, you mentioned that there are, a lot of people think about the personal and professional life, but there's the myth there. What's the myth of the personal and professional life?
Yeah, I think some people, I tried to do this at one point, but I think some people try to compartmentalize. I got my professional life and I got personal life, and I don't want those to intermix. And I'm not going to say what the right approach is. My opinion is, the way I've lived is I integrate those things. My personal and professional life are integrated. And the idea of, hey, honey, don't call me during work hours because I'm busy working. Well, forget that. We need to talk and stay in contact. And me telling my boss, don't call me after 5, that doesn't work either. So I know a lot of people talk about, well, what about balance? And I say, well, there's a lot of ways to come at balance. And especially in the world we're in right now, with everyone many people working remotely, I think some of the organizations who have done it right have set up protocol and rules. Just because I can get in touch with you between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. doesn't mean I should.
Right.
So there should be rules around when I text you or when I call you. Let's create a structure, because if you don't, that's when balance gets out of whack. And so that compartmentalization, I don't think, is a good approach, because they spill over into each other. And I used to tell my team that. I worked with my assistant for 16 years, and she had a daughter our oldest son's age. And I very clearly told her, I said, look, as long as the work gets done and someone's answering the phone, I'm never going to rate your performance on whether you're here early or late, or if you have to leave early for a dentist appointment or a school play or a sporting event. I expect you to do that, because I'm going to do that. I'm going to, I'll leave work early, and I'm hoping my boss doesn't judge my performance on that, because I'm committed to the job. I just may be working on from a different location. And I think it's funny. A lot of companies were against work from home, and now they've been forced to do it. And I don't think it has anything to do with the social connection, or, well, it has a little bit to do with that, the technology. I just don't think people trust their people. It's a trust issue. And if you want to have people work from home and then start micromanaging them, that's a recipe for disaster. Just tell people, here's what I expect you to get done every week, and here's how we're going to measure it. And now you figure it out. If you work all night and sleep all day or whatever, or just if you have to show up to the right meetings, get it done. That's my opinion. Don't prescribe how people should get work done, because it's really a demotivator.
You talk about delegation and the way to delegate. Speaking of turning things over to your employees and stuff, can you go in a little bit about the best way to delegate so that they win and you win?
Yeah. So delegation, in my opinion, is a fantastic opportunity to develop people. When you delegate, you're showing trust in them. You're giving them credibility. They're building their confidence. They're having to learn new skills, new decision-making, because you're allowing them to have a role in your position so they can, see what that's like. And what I've seen is the best delegation happens when here's when it doesn't go well. People wait until they're overwhelmed with too much work, and then they start delegating. And if you delegate to someone without clear expectations, or you never train them on how to handle whatever you want them to handle, you're doing them a disservice, because they're going to fail. And then you're going to say, well, I'm not going to delegate anymore. I have to do everything myself because they couldn't do it. Well, you can't just blindly delegate. You have to sit down with people and say, look, before I delegate this, I'm going to train you on this. I want you to come to a couple of meetings, and I want you to see the dynamics of the meeting. I want you to see what materials I brought to the meeting to be ready to talk about this. We'll go together a few times, and then eventually I'm going to have you start attending that meeting on my behalf. And you're going to be able to make decisions and get back to me. And now that's going to free me up to do something else. And I think we just don't spend enough time in the setup on delegating. We don't see it as a training thing. We just throw it at people because we just dump it on them because of our bad organization, or we haven't calculated how much work we had to get done. And now we use it as a release. And then people are stuck with, they want to be successful, but we're not very fair at how we do that with them. So I think if you want to delegate to someone, don't let it be a knee-jerk reaction. Find out who you really value on your team, whose judgment you value, who your high performers are. It's a great way to recognize people. Then talk to them and tell them, I'd like to delegate some more things to you so you can learn more, because eventually one day you might be in my job and I want you to get that experience now. Can you do that right now? Is this a good time for you? I've had leaders tell me, you know what, Dan, I got 3 kids at home. We're rolling out this new menu at 3 restaurants, and this quarter is not a good time for me. Is next quarter okay? And then you start negotiating that. And I think that's perfectly fine. I think a lot of people say, well, you just have to say yes to everything. And good leaders really have a dialogue, and you come up with a conversation, a decision together. And once they're ready to learn, you train them, and then you start delegating, and all of a sudden it's one thing that you don't have to do anymore. They love doing it. They're getting the experience. You're getting the work done. And now it's making your breadth of sort of productivity go up pretty dramatically.
So I think a lot of times too, it takes a lot of, the person has to be secure to delegate. If you're insecure, then I feel like I need to do all the work, and I don't want this person taking my job, so. Right. So there's all that, and
yeah, that's just,
that's a no.
All that is just, it's not right. It's, everyone knows you're in the job you're in. We always used to talk about Disney. If you expect to get promoted, you better have someone ready to fill in for you and knows what's happening. Retention is a huge piece. If people don't feel like they're being developed, they'll go somewhere else. And the thing is, in my mind, development isn't about being sent to classes. I think we always think about it that way. There's an opportunity to develop every single day if you create the right learning environment. Hey, we just went through a really tough, difficult situation at this today. Let's recap it. Let's see what we all learned out of this and how we're going to get better next time. That's fantastic development that happens in the field.
Right.
I actually think 80 to 90% of development should happen in life every day. You just got to slow down and realize what you're learning. And going to a class is nice. It's to get away from the treadmill and be able to take a step back and learn something new. But the reality is, if you want to keep learning, you better figure out how to do it on the job, because that's where you're going to spend the preponderance of your time.
I saw a lot of upper management come and visit our business, and they would always spend all day with upper management and never with the frontline employees. I noticed in your book, you mentioned more than a couple of times, that you would ever so often have lunch with the frontline employees. Why was that important?
Yeah, I mean, this is another, I think, common sense kind of thing that people lose track of. It's there. I guess there's a few reasons for it. One is, when you're in a leadership role, there's a lot of things people aren't telling you, because there's not a lot of good that comes out of telling the boss bad news or things that aren't working. And so it's not that people are hiding it from you. They're just not talking about it. So if you really want to hone in on what's actually going on in your organization, you got to go see what's going on with your frontline people.
Right.
Because they are the ones that are dealing with the guests every day. They know what the guests like, what they don't like. And as I talk about this, that any organization, whether it's a call center or a retail or a theme park or a hotel, whatever it is, your customers rate their experience with your company based on the interaction they have with all the frontline people. And that rating makes it decide whether they're going to come back again and whether they're going to recommend you. And so if you equip your frontline people, you empower them to be able to make decisions, you value them and tell them constantly how valuable they are to you, you respect them, you train them, you give them the right tools, then they're going to be successful, and you as a leader are going to be successful, because your job is to make sure you're delivering great service. And so that was my goal all the time. And I used to go down to the cafeteria regularly, and without the entourage. Everyone said, well, you have this. I would go by myself and get my lunch, and I just pick a table and go sit down with a group. And the first time I did it, everyone's like, what are you doing here? Why are you with us? We're not telling you
what
anything.
did we do?
Yeah, don't say anything. And then like the 8th or 9th time I showed up, they're like, well, maybe Dan just really wants to have lunch with us and find out what's going on. And I would chat with people, and I would chat about, hey, how you doing? I'm Dan, and hey, we're on the college program. Oh, cool. How has the experience been? Well, it's been good, but at our housing complex, our water's been out for a day and a half, and we're trying to get the water back on. Oh, really? Okay, let me see if I can make a call. Then I make a call. Hey, did you know their water's been out? And I could fix stuff. Other times I could get feedback on, when we at night when we leave here at 2 a.m, all the lights in the employee parking lot go off, and we don't feel safe. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right. We should have those lights on all the time. Well, why did they go off? Well, someone who was doing an environmental program decided they were going to save money and turn the lights off at 2 a.m. They didn't check with anybody. And now we're putting so now I can make a call and say, hey, the lights should be on until dawn. And all of a sudden I was able to fix that. So the idea wasn't I was there to fix everything, but I certainly could fix a lot of things. Plus I was role modeling. I think that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. The general managers, they saw me out there all the time talking to people, and they're like, well, if Dan's out there, we better get out there too.
Exactly. And
then their managers said, well, if the GMs are out there, we better get out there too. And so there's a little bit of an accountability along the way. And people know if they can call us and bring up issues, the manager's like, well, instead of calling Dan, why don't you just tell me and see if we can fix it? And it creates an organization where people are listening. And when the frontline leaders see the vice president really interested in listening to the frontline employees, you're teaching them that they're really valuable too. And
which is a huge morale boost.
Yeah, I think it is. And, I think a lot of executives just kind of get in this mindset, well, I have bigger things to think about. Well, you do, but you also have little smaller things to think about. You need to be thinking about the strategy, and you have to be thinking about what's happening every single day. And that's what makes the job challenging, but that's what it is. You're responsible, or at least I was responsible, for day-to-day operations and long-term strategy. And I had to be comfortable to toggle between both, and that was the job.
You said you, in the book, you mentioned that you posted your phone number around, and when I read that, I was like, well, that's a really great idea, but that's like kind of a high wire act. I mean, your mid-management now is like, well, who does he think we are? I mean, does he not need us anymore? And then
that's a great point.
And then, and so, you don't want, I know what you were doing, but you were just trying to say, hey, look, I'm listening. If you've got a question, let me know. I'm not telling you to come to me with every question, because how many cast members were you in charge of? 12,000 or something?
12,000, yeah.
12,000? Yeah, so you don't want your phone ringing day and night. So how did you balance that? I mean, you kind of, you shot across the bow and said, hey, listen, I'm listening. You can call me at any time if your issues are not getting solved.
Right.
So how did you take care of your mid-managers, let them know, hey, I'm not trying to replace you. I'm just
right.
Kind of go into that a little bit.
No, it's funny you point that out, because I think that's something that some people, the first reaction is, well, what if you get 50 calls a day? I said, if I get 50 calls a day, we got a big problem. Why would 50 people want to call me about all the problems that aren't being handled? And that wasn't the case. I'd get a few every week. But it was also, I think the other piece was how I did it. Before I even put this in place, I talked to the managers and I talked to my general managers, and I said, look, I'm going to make it easy for people to get in touch with me. But I'm not looking the goal of me doing this is not to find out if you're doing your jobs or not. I said, I don't care how good you are. We always are going to have stuff that we got to work on here. We got a gigantic operation. I mean, we're doing $2 billion in revenue a year. We have 12,000 employees. We have 20 million guests visiting. There's constantly a laundry list of things in every single business here that we can improve upon. And I'm not the one that's just above it all. I'm here to help you get better. So once they heard that, they're like, okay, now we'll see what happens when people do call and complain about us. And the sign I put up everywhere was, you know what, we have a very strong management team here at the Magic Kingdom, and they can really resolve your issues and I would strongly encourage you to talk to them. However, I know there are circumstances where you don't want to talk to them, or you're not sure where to go with an issue. If that's the case, I invite you to call me. And some people would say, I'd get calls where, hey, Dan, I talked to my managers. There's a rung missing in a ladder that we use, and they've tried to call engineering twice and it hasn't been replaced. And I know how important safety is to you. I wanted to let you know. So then I was able to call engineering, my general manager of engineering, and say, hey, can you get this fixed? And can you go do a little root cause analysis? Did anyone actually call this ticket in? Did someone say it was fixed and it wasn't? So not only is this ability to fix stuff, but it's ability to go back and find out why it hadn't been addressed and fix that problem. And if you can fix the root cause, and a lot of times we just fix the symptoms, we don't fix the root problems. Because half the time the engineering would say, yeah, no one ever called it in. Well, how would you expect engineering to fix it if no one called it in? There's a ticket number for it. So I would make sure my GMs knew, and I'd forward the voicemails to them. Hey, you have a cast member. They called. They said their manager is discriminating against them. I don't necessarily think that's true, but we do need to investigate this. Please get into it and let me know what the outcome is. And I wouldn't, leave that message with a judgment on them. Just because someone told me the story only meant I had half the story.
Right.
And I think a lot of leaders jump to conclusions and say, one of your people called me and they say you're doing a terrible job and what's going on down there. It's like, well, no, you haven't talked to us yet. That person there. Right. And so sometimes the truth was in the middle, like it always is. Mm-hmm. And as long as my general managers knew I was on their side, I was there to hold them accountable to their jobs, but I was there to be an extra pair of eyes and ears. I told them, if one of your cast members calls for the problem, it's also my problem and your problem, because we work together and our goal is to do the best job we can here. So if you're going to open that door, you can't use it as a punishment. You can't use it as a penalty for people calling you. And if you handle things the right way, the GM, my team at least, stepped up. And actually, one of my general managers came out with a little campaign, call Deb, not Dan. She's like, if you think you need to call Dan on something, call me first. Give me a chance to fix it. And if I don't fix it, then you call him. But I can handle stuff too. So it just got everyone more focused on where the value of Disney was. And that's the frontline employees with the frontline guests where the magic happens. And if I could keep telling people that's where the most important place to focus our efforts was on, our guest scores would go up, our safety scores got better, our profitability got better, everything just got better because I knew that's where the value was.
And so ultimately too, you were responsible for this, the largest theme park in the world. And so ultimately, if no one fixes anything, the buck stops there. With you, if it doesn't, I'm the one who's gonna either get the success or the responsibility for the failure if we don't do what we're supposed to be doing. And what I said, a lot of this was I learned over time. I could control almost nothing. I could influence everything. People say, well, you're a vice president, you can make anything happen. I'm like, I couldn't get everyone to smile every day at every interaction, but I had to influence people. That's the best way to run our business. Right. So a lot of this is done over time with consistent leadership, consistent messaging, a good, solid, consistent management leadership strategy, and not getting bored with it and coming in every day and just keep focusing on it every single day, being more excited the next day and tomorrow that we're going to get better tomorrow. And we don't get complacent and it doesn't become repetitive. And then make sure everyone feels like and remembers we're the biggest theme park in the world. No one's doing this, and people saved for many years. And the weight of that responsibility should be heavy on our shoulders. We should be excited to have this opportunity to do such an incredible role, for people. Right. I remember I told the story before. Actually, I was telling somebody yesterday about this. I was on the back of a tram in the Magic Kingdom, and it's early in the morning, and people were starting to come in, and they're all fresh and smiling and excited. And got on the tram, and I was spieling on the back of the tram, and this little handicapped girl, she had braces on her legs and crutches, and so I held up the tram a little extra longer than need be to help make sure she got on okay, And so once everybody got situated, we went. And they were all smiles and everybody's excited. Okay, so I pulled 2 shifts that day. And that night, it was late into the night, we pull up into the Ticket and Transportation Center. And I didn't normally ever recognize anybody that I'd picked up the morning of. But this particular time, as we pulled up, everybody's tired, they're hot, they're sweaty, they're broke, the kids are tired and crying, and the parents just want to get back to the hotel. And I saw this same girl standing in line waiting for the tram, and she still had the biggest smile on her face, and she looked like she had had one of the best days of her life. And wow. And I thought to myself, maybe she probably hasn't had many good days because of this obvious handicap that she has. And I was super tired. If I had said one thing once, I'd said it 1,000,000 times that day, And I thought to myself, just in an instant, I thought everybody today worked really hard and did a good job and didn't break the spell. That everybody kept, they didn't, nobody, look from the smile on her face, you could tell no one dropped the ball and that everybody was on point on their game. So it made me stand up a little bit straighter. It made me take a deep breath and say, okay, this last ride, this is going to be for her, and this is going to be the best tram ride back to the car that they've ever had. And,
and that's something I think, Scott, what you're saying is, and I saw that at Disney, is the message was transmitted so often and so well that we were one big team. And no matter what our backgrounds were or what our differences were, our purpose was to create these life experiences for people and make sure we're working together to do that. And I'd call it a little bit in a positive way, peer pressure, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, you all are working so hard. I need to be on my game also. Right. Because we're all committed to do this. And I think any business out there can adopt the same idea. I don't care if you're a pharmacy, a bakery, or a theme park, a hotel, whatever your business is. When people walk in, the culture should be in a way that people are like, I like coming here. People are just positive. They're interested in me. And everyone feels like they're part of that team, that we're going to be the best at what we do. And
Right.
it makes people feel good. It gives people a purpose and pride to go to work every day.
In the book, you also talk about under recognition and rewards. I think that's the chapter it was under. You talk about DANana bread.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
What was DANana bread?
So when I was, I got a bread maker. You know, everyone buys a treadmill and a bread maker sometimes in their life.
Yeah.
And the treadmill becomes the place where you hang your clothes, and the bread maker goes in the closet and never comes out again.
Right.
So I made a few loaves of bread. I'm like, man, this is complicated. But then I started making banana bread. So I'd get up early in the morning. I was always an early riser. And we moved from Dr. Phillips, which is near Disney, to College Park, which is near downtown Orlando. And I'd go running, and there's a good amount of homeless people. And I started to bake bread. And I'd bake in the morning. It was nice and quiet. It's just me and the dog. I'm having my coffee, getting my emails done. I'd bake some bread, and I'd go out afterwards after my run and find a couple homeless people I'd seen and gave them a loaf of banana bread. And a lot of them looked at me like, they weren't sure what was going on, and I don't know if they threw it away or what, but anyway. So then I said, this is kind of cool and this is kind of different. So I started, I bake 2 or 3 loaves, probably 3 or 4 days a week, early in the morning, and I'd take it to work. And when I got to work, I'd maybe give a loaf to the security guy, or I'd go to the office and share it, or I'd go to the entertainment area and bring them a couple loaves of banana bread and just thank them for everything they're doing. And it became my thing. And so one of the chefs came up, and of course he was very creative. Instead of banana bread, it became DANana bread. And that was my signature item. And I do baking contests with people. And I think it's just a way to differentiate yourself and connect. In leadership, connecting is such an important thing. And, I couldn't bake enough bread for 12,000 cast members, but I could create moments for them. Because if you want your employees to create these really emotional connections with your guests or your customers, you have to be able to role model that once again. And if I wanted to show them that I was personally vested in that, and I would create these magical moments for them by baking for them. And, most of the time, talk about stereotypes, they'd say, hey, tell your wife we love the bread. I'm like, wait a second, I baked the bread. She was sleeping while I was baking. I was the guy. She's a great cook, but I'm the baker in the family.
Yeah.
So, but it was, like I said, it was just something to differentiate it and let people know that there is still a personal touch out there in a big corporate environment like Disney.
A lot of cast members, employees who are married or have partners, when they come to work, you really only have half the person. The other half is at home. And you talk about dialing in the spouses and partners of your cast members when it comes to rewards and recognition. And I've always thought that was important. Why is that important?
Well, families, just like, my family, Christmas morning, I'm up at 6 a.m. and I'm at work, and we wouldn't open presents till I got home that night. And 4th of July and Easter, if you work in hospitality, you're not home traditionally the times that you want to be. A lot of times your days off are during the week,
right?
And your kids are at school. So I just thought it was important. I knew the pressure my executives were getting at home. Now, it's not to say they made a decision to be in that business,
right?
But to make sure that you include the spouses and how much you appreciate what they're giving up also, I just thought was a good way to have a balanced approach. Because as an executive, if my boss could, send and thank my wife for the great job I'm doing, or send my kids something and tell them your dad's doing a great job, take them out to dinner, it's just a creative way to do it. And it gets everyone involved. And so the next time you have to call them and say, I need you to come in on Saturday, maybe their spouse will be a little more forgiving because they know that you really appreciated them too.
Yeah, it's a good gesture. It's a super good gesture.
Yeah.
We're doing a podcast now. You mentioned doing a podcast at the Magic Kingdom for your employees. Yeah. And I kind of had some questions about that. It was internal, right?
It was an internal podcast.
So how did you keep cast members from pushing it out externally?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. It was different. I think the podcast I do now is much more sophisticated because we have editing and a jingle and everything. When I did it at Magic Kingdom, they had this big plan. They're going to have a sound booth and a tech. I said, no, I'm just going to record a message on my iPhone, and I'm going to send you the file, and you put the entry, the beginning and end on it, and just email it out. So they emailed it to the managers. The managers could listen to it on an email. It was, only 4 or 5 minutes long. It wasn't a traditional podcast, but it was like, hey, here's what's on my mind this week. This is Dan. Here's what went well this week. Here's what we got to work on. And here's a couple recognition for some caster leaders out there. And what we concluded was whatever I was going to share on this podcast, I just assumed it was going to be shared externally. So I just had to make sure it was content that wasn't confidential, wasn't anything that would be a problem that got out externally. And that was fine. And some of it sometimes did go external, but it was all positive. And it was, like I said, you just had to make a judgment call to make sure. That's what we always did at Disney. If you're going to share something that can go public, just make sure you understand what it is, because
you weren't showing up on the news that evening.
Exactly.
One of the last things we'll talk about here is you said that a lot of businesses stop looking at their business from a customer's perspective through the customer's eyes. And you gave the example of the Starbucks pop-up. Why do businesses, that's one of the most important things, but we forget to do that. Why is that?
Yeah, it is interesting. I think because when we work, we become experts in what we do, and we stop thinking we need input, and we create processes and we create services and products that we just assume our customers are going to want. And because why wouldn't they? I think a little bit is ego. We just think we're just all knowing, and we're so good at that. And plus, what I found in business, we like to make things easy for ourselves. So sometimes we make things easy for ourselves internally, but we make it more difficult on our customers. And it's more efficient for us internally, but the customer experience isn't what it should be. And I've seen that happen so many times. I remember we went through a process at Disney at one point where the finance and engineering team looked at our reservation system, and they said, you know what, there's probably another 5% of efficiency we can squeeze out of the reservation system if you let us kind of get in there. And so they started doing that. And all of a sudden, parties of 3 could never get a reservation. Parties of 1 could never get a reservation because they weren't optimal, because the tables weren't set up that way. And the system would say, I don't want 3, I need 4. And all of a sudden we started, it was an unintended consequence of really bad guest service. So we had to pull back on that, because you're always trying to, weigh things between efficiency and great service and making sure you're hitting the sweet spot in that. And I think sometimes we just get too caught up in our own processes and our own internal policies, and we forget about what the guest is going through. And so I made a point of that regularly, to drive through the auto plaza, park in the parking lot, take the tram in, go through security bag check, buy a ticket, take the monorail, get in the park, just to see what that whole experience was like. And I would regularly park in the employee parking lot and go to costuming and pick up a costume. And is that place clean? And are they friendly? And do they have the right sizes in stock? And is the bus running on time to get you to the Magic Kingdom on time for work? And I think a lot of executives forget about that. And so if you're running a company or you're managing a company, call your office, call your 1-800 number, go to your website and buy something. Every time I launch a new product now, I go on my website and I buy it. And sometimes I realize it's not working. And so I call the programmer. I'm like, hey, this isn't working. We're going to launch tomorrow. Oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, didn't you buy something? And no, we didn't try it out. So it's just, these are very common sense kind of things. But when you start looking at your internal processes, and how the customer's experience looks, your decision-making changes dramatically. You become very more empathetic to them rather than your own internal view.
I have a friend here in town. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this if he's listening, but he has I'll just call it a shop, let's say. And there's a drive-through, and as I was in line in the drive-through waiting to pull up, I noticed on the front door there was a bar across the front door, and every person that walked up to the door to go in pushed against the bar, but the door opened to them, not in.
Right.
And every person that came up to that bar pushed against it, then realized what was going on, then pulled on it, and then walked in. So I told him, I said, I've been watching your customers walking in, and every one of them, it's like you're trying to keep them out with that bar there. Why don't you just flip the handles, put that handle on the inside, outside, and let them push against the bar as they go out? And he was like, oh, yeah, didn't know that. So
Yeah.
they switched it, and now the barrier to entry has been eliminated. So, it's just, it just takes someone like you with the Starbucks pop-up, just taking someone stepping back and just relax and just watch and just see how things play out.
And just pretend you don't know anything.
And pretend you don't know, which is easy for me to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, it's wow. We've gone on for almost an hour. I really appreciate your time, and the book is great.
Thank you.
Once again, how's the culture in your kingdom? This is good not only for hospitality, but if you're in the oil and gas business, or you've got a church or a doctor's office or whatever, you need to get this book. For more information on Dan Cockerell and his business now, I'll put his information at the end of the video here. And if you're listening on iTunes, I'll put it down in the show notes along with the link for the book. So anyway, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thanks for your time, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Really appreciate it. And I think I appreciate everyone listening, and good luck to you.
All right. Well, for Dan Cockerell, this is Scott Townsend. Thanks for watching and listening to the Scott Townsend Show. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
The Scott Townsend Show is a DANana production. For more episodes, visit the Scott Townsend Show YouTube channel, listen on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.